Hey everybody, welcome back to the main stage here at DesignerCon 2024. My name is Mark Brickey, the host of Adventures in Design. Thank you so much for making this a part of your Saturday. Sitting next to me, or sitting here on the stage, we have three artists from Flatstock. Flatstock is a poster exhibit that is happening in the back of DesignerCon. It has been around 100 different events. This weekend, Flatstock celebrates 100, and it's the first time it's become a part of DesignerCon. At the table with me, I have three different poster artists that are displaying back there, and each one of these fellas represents a different era in the poster art community. Starting off at the far end, we have Mike Clock from Stuffed Brain. He represents the new generation. This is your second Flatstock?
Second is correct, yep.
And you're from Detroit, Michigan?
Detroit, Michigan, yep.
Yep. And then in the middle here, we have Nathan Goldman from California, who represents the middle of this story. What was your first Flatstock that you guys did?
16.
16. So I'm saying the middle, but you started at 16. That's a lot. And then here we have Dan Stiles, who our first one was...
We were trying to figure that out the other night.
I think it was
seven,
eight.
6,
7 or 8. Yeah,
know.
somewhere.
I can't believe I'm the old guy here.
It happens. Quietly, we all become the old guy one day. So, as we're giving each of you an introduction into what Flatstock is, or the art of poster making, let's roll through and talk about why we each got into it and kind of explain it to the audience. So Dan, when you and I got into poster making way long time ago, I know for me personally, it was like, I get to design how I want, but I also get to sell a product straight to the consumer. That was a big thing that drew me in. What brought you in back in the day?
I had no idea you could make money doing this. So I got into this because I was like a teenage punk rocker and I couldn't play an instrument. But in order to get into the shows, I had to kind of work a scam, and I was like, I'll do the flyers. And I got paid $20 and all the beer I could drink. And I was totally sold, because before that I was doing like graffiti and stuff, but you gotta like draw each one of those individually. But if you make one poster and they make 100 of them and somebody else puts them up, I was like, shit, man, that's easy enough. And you'll pay me $20 and beer.
And so when you started making posters as a hobbyist, something to get into shows.
Self-taught. Yeah.
Self-taught. When did you flip over to actually selling your artwork?
I think I saw the work of Frank Kozik, and I was like, oh, you can do this professionally.
Yeah.
And I had to learn how to screen print, and I had to learn a bunch of stuff. But then it kind of like opened up this whole new zone where I was like, oh, you can kind of be a professional fuck up.
Yeah, that's a great term. Nathan, for yourself, representing sort of the middle of this story, when DKNG Studios, which is the studio that Nathan is one half of, when DKNG Studios showed up in the Flatstock scene, it had kind of modernized. There was sort of an established template of the business model, like how you work with bands, how you sell your own merchandise. So give us a little indication on what it was like to drop in the middle of this story.
Yeah, I guess at that point, gigposters.com was going strong, so we could kind of like tap into the scene online and see what was going on. Dan and I both played in a band together in high school, and we were making our own posters and album art just for fun. And kind of like Dan, we discovered through Scrojo, this artist in San Diego, that this could be a career and could be a way to make money. But we didn't know anything about screen printing. The only kind of information we could find was about screen printing t-shirts. Mm-hmm. So we were doing digital posters, showed up at Flatstock, and were like fish out of water, but also felt like this is where we could learn. And talking to guys like you is where we started understanding how to actually make posters. So yeah, we were kind of bridging this gap between trying to do things by ourselves, like digitally and figuring it out, but also realizing if we become part of this community, maybe we can start to learn even faster.
And Nathan brings up a good point that if you go to Flatstock in the back, almost everybody there prints their own artwork. And if they don't print their own artwork, they have somebody else that prints it for them, but it's largely silkscreen. So if you're an artist and you're looking for an entry-level way to start selling your own work, learning the art of silk screening or learning somebody in your network that knows the art of silk screening is a great way to take art for an affordable price. You have reproductions made, and it's up to you what you sell those for. But if you think about whatever that dollar amount is times an addition of 100 or 200, the money starts to flow in. The more designs you have, the more you can sell, and it becomes a good part of passive income. And for many of us, it's also a great way to audition to get new clients. Because when you're designing for yourself, you also happen to do your absolute best work. And so, Mike, you started doing this just a couple of Flatstocks ago, like earlier this year was your first one?
Correct, yeah.
And so you had the luxury of 90 of these happening before you showed up, which makes it a little bit more intimidating, because when Dan and I showed up, the rules were sort of being written, and then you show up and it's a pretty established thing. What was that like being the new guy?
Intimidating as hell, honestly. Sitting there going, okay, these are people I've looked up to for a long time. They've kind of created lanes and avenues for us to produce goods, but how do I follow in their footsteps but blaze my own trail? What hasn't been done yet? How do I stand out? All those questions come into focus, and the nice thing is you just realize how cool everyone is and how welcoming they are, and they show you a lot of the ropes pretty quickly.
Yeah, everybody's really cool back there because I stopped doing it and I was the bully. So now it's a very, very friendly community.
Yeah, I remember at Flatstock, we were so nervous the first few times we did it that Dan and I would be like, okay, we want to go over to the Hero Design booth, Mark's company, and like, what are we going to ask him this time? Should we like ask about how to make textures, or like we would have to kind of psych ourselves up to go up to you guys and figure out what we were going to like try to glean from you?
So one thing I've noticed is as new faces show up, the quality of art, it just keeps ratcheting up. Like,
yes.
When you and I were doing it way back when, like if you showed up with a flyer with anything on it, it didn't matter what the image was. People were like, cool, Primus flyer, yeah.
Right.
And I mean, the art, a lot of it was really bad. And if people like you had gone back in time with your work now and shown up in, 1995 or 2001, you would have been just king, like absolutely dominant. Because there were so many people who were like a bouncer at a club who were just gluing shit to paper, and they were established poster artists.
I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about that for the work that you guys have done to show and share your techniques and tricks. And I think it's allowed people like myself to maybe level up a little faster, where it's a primitive medium, but boy, it's becoming pretty advanced with the things that you can do to it. And having people share those secrets and inside tips, just makes us go a little easier along the road.
So one of the things I'd love to talk about now is, if you're an illustrator or a designer, your number one goal is you want to get known for your style. But I find that everybody, when you're starting on this path, you get hired because you're available, you seem responsible, and you're affordable. And at some point, you need to transition into, they want to work with you because you're you, and you do something unique in the marketplace that they don't feel like anybody else does. These posters, we always talked about them, they're 18 by 24 inch business cards or auditions to try to get hired to do your vision. So Dan, talk about in your career how the gig posters started bringing in the AT&Ts and the corporate clients and all that stuff that said, I want you to do you.
I think the important thing, and you touched on it, is that when you get to be your own art director and your own illustrator and your own designer, you're gonna bring your best work to the table, because most of these clients, I don't know, Green Day or whoever, they want your weirdest work. They want you to really go out there. And most corporate clients are the opposite. They really want your safest work. So it's great to be able to create really unhinged stuff for clients that want that. And then you can take that to Coca-Cola and they'll be like, oh yeah, we're seeing something that already exists. And so there's no risk involved. And they ask you essentially to plagiarize yourself. I've done most of the corporate work that I do is self-plagiarization, where it's something I've done for a smaller client that was effective, and I've proven that that is a strategy that cool people like or whatever. And so these multi-billion-dollar companies don't feel like they're just throwing their money away.
So you get hired to rip yourself off.
Yes.
That's your favorite person to rip off, though, right?
Yeah.
I think one thing that you've probably experienced too with those clients is when they start to micromanage you and try to take control of the project, you have to remind them, you hired me for this work that you saw me do that I was able to have control over.
Yes.
And if you want that, you kind of have to let us do our thing. Don't try to wrestle it away from us, because then it might not be the result that you're looking for.
Yeah, they ruin it. They oftentimes will come in and like give you a color palette or something terrible that you're like, this is ineffective.
Which is what we used to refer to as the MOE clause, M-O-E. horrible band named Mo hired us to do artwork, and they bullied us. They art directed us to do what Mo wanted, and it looked like shit. And it was not successful, and they couldn't sell them, and neither could we. So whenever people would try to hire us and they started to kind of push us around, I'd be like, you emailed us because you wanted us to do what we did for Death Cab or for Spoon or for whatever band, but let me show you this Mo poster that you never mentioned. This is what happens when we get bullied. So do you want the Mo poster or do you want the ones that you emailed us about? And I was so happy that they sucked so much because they gave us the opportunity to never have to get bullied again, because everyone's like, we definitely don't want that thing. Do you have anything like that, Nathan, where when people are trying to push you down a wrong direction, that you can just be like, not for nothing, but we did this for Bank of America, or we did this for ourselves, and it just didn't work out well because of X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, no, you're inspiring me to make a presentation of here's how things go wrong and stop doing what you're doing. But no, I mean, we try to always frame the project in what's their objective and try to like get them back to that North Star, because I think sometimes when you get deeper into a project, the client can start reacting in an emotional way and talking about what they like or what they don't like. And we try to be like, okay, that may be your personal opinion, but let's go back to why you hired us and what you want, and that hopefully you're trusting us for our creative input and not just to be your hand that knows how to use Illustrator and you're the creative. And we just try to kind of frame it in the most polite way possible to get them back on track.
Oh, you don't do it like I do it?
Yeah, the amateur art direction that you get from clients will derail a project so fast.
Yeah.
It's shocking how fast a really awesome project can go south when, you know, Mary, who works in PR, is like, oh, you know, gets her hands in there and just...
Or when Mary says, I asked my children what they think about it.
Oh,
And
that's
they
my
like this
favorite.
one.
Yeah, I showed the logo to my daughter, and she doesn't think that it looks good. I'm like, oh, what's her position at the company?
Or you finish a project, it's all the way done, and the CEO takes it home and shows his wife.
Yeah.
And then comes back to you and says, no, we don't want this anymore. My wife hates orange. And you're like, what, your wife, like, she wasn't here for the last 4 weeks working on this with us. She doesn't know anything about the project. She just hates orange, and that's enough.
Yeah. And this is one of the examples of the more work that you do for yourself, the more sort of a case study you have to defend your work. You know, and like you said, Nathan, it's like you hope that they're coming to you because they believe in what you do. And so the gig poster model allows people an affordable way to keep betting on themselves. Because let's be honest, the older you get, the more complicated life gets. The older you get, the less time you have in both your life, but in your daily basis. And so being able to justify working 2 or 3 days on an illustration, being able to justify spending a day printing because somebody somewhere has guaranteed you a certain amount of money, or you feel like you can sell it on your web store or at events like this, it gives you that space to actually place a bet on yourself. Because we all know us and ourselves and our friends that has this amazing website of their portfolio work from a decade ago because they haven't updated their website. So this is kind of a forced way to keep betting on yourself.
Yeah.
Mike, when you got involved in this, talk about a little bit from somebody who just is getting involved, like how you're hoping to be like these guys, to where what you're doing today recruits in that next level of clients that maybe wouldn't necessarily find you being in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Yeah, so I can say my first Flatstock in Austin earlier this April, one of my larger corporate customers found me through that booth. You just have to really immerse yourself and become a part of the scene to get noticed. You can throw stuff out into the ether and the internet all the time, but physically being there, presenting your wares in a cohesive look in your booth, saying this is my style, this is how I represent myself, and this is how I market myself and other people, whether it be bands or art prints. It really gives you an opportunity to catch their attention in a unique way that the internet's just oversaturated with. So being here just helps a lot and captures more attention.
So we've talked a little bit about what it's like to bet on yourself. We've talked about how this can help you get clients. Let's talk about customers. Let's talk about some of our favorite things. There's been 100 Flatstocks, which means tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have walked up and down the aisles. And many of these people have had such fun things to say. Does anybody remember one of your favorite comments?
They all say the same thing.
What do they say?
I mean, First of all, do you make all these yourself?
Bingo. Survey says.
Yeah, people saying, I think it was actually a San Francisco event that we were at where people were saying, so do you guys all get your posters from the same source? And I think we jokingly told them, well, there's a catalog and we all try to pick from different pages so we don't overlap too much.
So do you take this and have somebody put it on a shirt for you, or can you do that for me?
Yeah. My favorite was one time in Chicago, there was this very, very complete Chicago hipster-looking guy who was going up to every booth, and he'd walk up to me and be like, do you have an Animal Collective poster? And people were like, no, we don't have one. And he would go to the next one and the next one and the next one. And eventually he came up to our friend's booth, and they had an Animal Collective poster. And they'd been holding it, waiting like, we're gonna get this guy. He's looking for an Animal Collective poster. So the little hipster comes up and he goes, do you have an Animal Collective poster? And they pull theirs up and they show it to him and he goes, do you have any other Animal Collective posters? Like, people will be brutal to your face and not even realize you do the art.
They don't realize that it's your work.
No,
Yeah.
like the kind woman that came up to my booth once and goes, out of all of these booths here, this one's definitely the worst one.
I remember we had someone come to our booth, commented on a Wizard of Oz poster that we had done with Mondo back in the day. And she said to me, you know you're going to get in trouble for this. And I said, why? And she said, because you can't bootleg stuff like that. That's what I've been doing, and I'm getting in a lot of trouble. And we had to say, like, no, it's officially licensed. Here's the copyright. But yeah, people just assume that you're, a mirror of what they're doing. Or it's interesting, you kind of are this armchair psychologist to people because they realize that you are held hostage at your booth.
Oh, God.
And they have to sit there. You have to sit there and listen to them. So yeah, you get a lot of interesting commentary from people.
But I think in an interesting way, the weird comments do a couple of things. They make your sensitivity a little bit stronger, right?
Yeah.
Like they put that extra layer of skin on you to be a little bit tougher. They also allow you to communicate better with clients over the phone or over Zoom calls because you deal with so many people like face to face. But there's also a nice compliment in there that they're just looking at all this work, this professional grade work, and it's not even dawning on them that the person standing right there isn't a carnival vendor, but actually the person that learned how to illustrate and print and do all these prints, right? So I feel like it changes you in a way like nothing ever could, just sitting there time and time again, talking to Joe Public.
Yeah, it's hugely educational because you find out what people want.
Yeah.
And we start getting into a lot smaller prints and table items because people say, I love this, I just don't have any wall space left. And yeah, it really is like the perfect market research to talk to people and figure out how you want to kind of take that and distill it down to what you're going to do next.
You can bring up table items. Let's talk a little bit about, like, you have your posters, which are your big pieces of artwork that are in the booth, but it helps to have things at different price points. And sometimes when you bet big on that big poster, there's little pieces that you can extract out of there and it works into a patch or a pin. Like, let's talk a little bit about making the little things that go on the table, because for some people that are trying to find a way to get involved in making their own artwork, that's a very easy way to jump in because it's, you go to a website, you upload your image, and now you're producing your own art.
Stickers.
Stickers?
One word, stickers.
You love stickers?
I don't, but I have a lot of them. I mean, I like stickers like back in the 80s, the skateboard stickers were, they were cool. You go to the skate shop, they'd be under the glass, you know, and you'd have to be like, can I get one of those? So I do a lot of stickers. The problem with it is, though, that you can sit in this place for the whole weekend and sell, 300 stickers, but at $4 each, you're not paying for your trip.
Right.
So that's the issue with the cheap table items, I find, is that people they're like, oh, I love that poster. Oh, you have it as a sticker? $30? $3. Well, give me the $3 one.
Well, you Dan, Nathan at DKNG, you guys have forever done the business model of the postcards, right? Where you would take older posters that you no longer were selling as full size, but you still have that artwork, so you would do the postcards. Is that still part of your business model?
Not really, and because of what Dan is saying, we kind of realized, like, okay, if we provide all these options, people are going to gravitate to the cheaper ones. So we then started selling postcard packs, so at least we're selling a $10 or $20 item rather than like dollar items one at a time. But yeah, now we've started distilling it down to like certain prints are only in this size, small or large. We still have people saying like, can I get that but smaller, which I think is inevitable. But yeah, we're trying to have a little bit less choice and kind of pushing people into a lane as far as what they have to buy now.
What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I need to make more stickers because having those just tactile, tangible items so that people can walk away with and share with their friends or whatever really makes a difference. It's nice to have the big $60 prints up, but when they aren't moving or people are traveling like they do for a show like this, it can be a harder sell.
I saw Mike when Dan was talking about his sticker math. I saw Mike doing the math. He was like, $3, 400. Why don't I have a pile of stickers on my table?
And I do think it's nice to give people something to do at your booth. One thing that was nice when we did have the postcards was we invited people to like make their own mix and match set. So like having people stay at your booth and interact with it seems to be really helpful because then other people will see, oh, there's something going on there. And I think we see that happening a lot here at DCon of like, once one booth catches fire, it, brings people in. So there's something to be said just to like,
flip racks, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Too. Just activities that keep you there a little bit longer.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Retail's insanely, I was going to say mental, but that's right. I mean, it's insanely like human characteristic of it's intimidating. Do I want to walk into a booth? Is somebody going to talk to me? Are they going to try to get me to buy something? So what we're talking about really is that so many of these little tricks you learn along the way is like, how do I draw some people in so it just doesn't look sad and desperate? Like you see somebody who looks like they really need to sell and you're just kind of like, hey, and you just keep walking past, But if you see a crowd, you're like, oh, what's going on in there? It draws you and brings you in. One of the things that makes the exhibit in the back, Flatstock 100, truly unique, though, is that most of that artwork is either printed by the person that's in the booth or somebody that they're, pretty close to. The art of screen printing goes way, way back to the beginning of printing. And, we've all done it with the use of the Adobe Creative Suites and printers that print out our films. But there's something to be said about living in this digital world, but understanding that old antiquated printing technique. I think that I was an okay designer, but when I started having to silkscreen my own stuff, that's when I felt like I became a good designer because I understood more like the architecture behind what I was trying to make. And I also understood all the nights when I did it wrong and I couldn't go to bed because it was a disaster. And each one of those lessons were learned the hard way. So let's talk a little bit about the art of printmaking and how that has sort of trickled down into other aspects of your career. Mike, you're relatively new to printmaking, right? You started in the last 8 years or so?
Yeah, 8 years or so, yeah. And for me, the biggest realization was I'm accountable for printing and setting up each and every color. So how many colors do I want to use? How much do I want to paint myself on this project? And so learning color theory, color dichotomy, getting things across the page to blend and make sense visually, but having a practical application for how I'm actually going to produce this thing, it became a big consideration once I started printing stuff for myself.
Yeah, that economy made me a better designer.
Yeah.
Like just being like, well, fuck, I'm not going to do 7 colors. Like, how can I make this work in 2 or 3? And it makes your work a lot more creative to have constraints. I mean, psychologically, if you let the sky's the limit sounds like a really good thing until the sky really is the limit, and then you're like, oh God, I don't know what I'm doing. So having really hard constraints, like you have the client's only gonna pay for 3 colors, how are you gonna make this vision of yours work in 3 colors actually makes the work better.
It does, because if you go back to the 20s and the beginning of like mass consumerism, and you look at all the packaging from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, when it was all spot color, some of that stuff is amazing. And it's just black and red on an off-white cardstock, which probably was white back then, but now it looks off-white. Yeah. And it starts to get to the point where when you train your brain to work with less, if you do something that's full color or digital, you're just like, I don't need it.
Yeah.
I don't need all that extra. It's just noise, really,
Yeah. I feel like even now when we get hired for corporate jobs where color count doesn't matter, it might be something that's only going to live digitally, the client still responds to that limited palette and they still want a screen printed looking aesthetic for the work regardless of that count. But I think for us, it was hugely helpful to try doing it ourselves. For years, we screen printed our own work. We weren't good at it, but at least we understood the process. And now that we work with really talented printers, we can speak the same language and make our separations as clean and easy as possible for them to work with. So yeah, it's definitely like a great gateway into creating this kind of artwork.
My understanding of screen printing from being a printer for over a decade also helps me a lot with corporate clients today, and sort of the problem solving of this is what, you know, a very picky Fortune 500 company wants. This is when they need it. Let's do the problem solving on how to get that there in the most efficient way. So just the problem solving of printmaking just rolls through your brain from the top to the bottom. So Dan and Nathan here are two pretty regular speakers on the Adobe Max circuit, which is the absolute biggest corporate design conference that happens annually in America, probably the world. Flatstock is very punk rock, it's very DIY. That is very much not any of those things.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of a bit of your perspective on how those type of events are so different than things like DesignerCon and Flatstock specifically.
I think the reason they bring us to those events is because we represent stuff like this, which is actually a lot more creative. Not to bag on Adobe Max or anything, but it's very expensive to get a ticket, and so
a lot of people having their clients.
A lot of people that wind up there are working in large corporate, like maybe at a hospital, doing brochures and websites, and so they bring in people that make rock posters because we kind of bring color to the whole thing. Like we're not just. I think a lot of people go into graphic design because they think it's going to be cool, and a lot of design work is not cool. The stuff that pays well is not cool. So they kind of bring us in to be the cool kids. At least that's what they do for me. Maybe not you.
Yeah. I want to push back. Hold on that. I want to push back on one thing. The not cool work is the work in the middle. The work that, like, when it's not cool work, that exists in the middle, and that's where you make middle money. The coolest work is where you make the most money, and the coolest work is where you make the least amount of money.
Yeah.
It bookends the spectrum on what you can make as a designer, right?
Yeah.
But the bulk of work, 90% of it that goes from 10 to 90, that middle in there, it's bullshit. It's just laborious bullshit of construction. But those top two bookmarks, that's where the fun's at.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nathan.
absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say, I think when people like us are at a conference like Adobe, it helps to legitimize what they're doing. And also, I know that I would prefer, if I'm seeing like a demo of a new product or something, when they do it and seeing again, not to like bag on them, but to see an employee from Adobe make a hypothetical flyer to demo whatever latest plugin they have, it's like, yeah, that's fine. But if I could see Dan work on a real poster for a real client and see a true case study as opposed to some hypothetical project, it makes it more authentic. So I think that's what we try to bring to it when we speak there, is we're not just like playing with the tool just to show it off. It's like, here's how we actually use it in our work, and try to give people more insight. It seems like people respond to that of like, I want to do what you're doing. I wasn't just here, to look at a car at a car dealership, essentially.
Well, and one of the innovations that DKNG Studios was kind of known for is that with silk screening, everything has to be 100% true black. So how do you create shading and shadows and texture in your work? And they came up with some sort of wild idea about a decade or so ago on taking images and placing it inside of their artwork, right? Like, for example, they would take like a sky. And you know how a sky, it starts real blue here and it works its way over to a lighter blue. If you take that and simplify that into a piece of your artwork, all of a sudden that cruise ship has then that texture sort of running through it. So there's also a level of, because of this being so experimental and you're doing work for yourself, it's the innovation that people in the back and people in this room do with like the Adobe Creative Suites, where it's like they make the product, but we're the ones that make the magic and figure out how to hack the product into the vision that we want to make.
Yeah, I think it's fun to try to like reinvent it. Also, I think through like teaching, once we share something with the world, it's like, okay, how can we come up with something new? So
because we just gave it away.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a comedian. Like once they do their special, you can't tell those jokes anymore. You got to come up with something new. So
hamburger.
So yeah, we are trying to essentially hack it to figure out what can we do differently and like force this program to work for us, which is a whole other level of frustration because every time they update it, it doesn't work the way you wanted it to, and you have to figure out your new solutions to make it do what you want it to do.
Dan, what do you think the biggest difference is for Flatstock turning 100 from when you walked up on Flatstock 6, 7, or 8 that we still can't figure out which one it was?
I think, like I said before, just the level of professionalism among the artists. I think back at Flatstock 6, probably nobody exhibiting had an art degree or any professional training. They were just kind of doing it by the seat of the pants kind of thing. And then, you know, like these guys showed up and kind of raised the bar.
Well, I'll say I don't have an art degree or professional training, but the resources that are available now online is its own kind of school and education,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, you guys didn't have YouTube?
No. Well, I mean, there was YouTube, but it was just like a cat and a dancing baby.
Yeah.
Nobody was like, what if I show people how to do this thing? What about you, Nathan? What do you think? Because, I mean, you've been going for 80-something of them. What do you think the big difference is?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it was interesting, again, when Gig Posters, this website that was kind of an archive of everything that people in our world were doing, it was so interesting to look at, like, page 1 was where people are at now with their style and skill, and then go back and back and back and see more of this, like, collaged flyer type look, which we were at the beginning just trying to emulate that style that felt very authentic to the Gig Poster world. It wasn't supposed to be this super detailed, super painterly, photorealistic style, but now it kind of feels like that. Like there's this elaborate oil painting that has a band name slapped on it, and especially with the printers that we have to work with now, people are doing 20 color screen prints. So
well, I think you've hit on something there with the fact that they have really become collectibles.
Mm-hmm.
And when this first started out, they were still kind of working as advertising.
yeah, it was marketing.
It was marketing for the show. You put them out in advance to the show to get people to come. Yeah. That almost never happens anymore. Now they are sold the night of the show at the merch table next to the CDs and the T-shirts, and so that's ratcheted up the budgets and the amount of time and the amount of detail. And you're right, now they look like oil paintings with the name on it, whereas the old ones were pretty slapdash by comparison.
The origins of Flatstock goes back to people making concert posters. Along the journey, people started to realize, like, maybe I can throw an art print in there and do it without a band name on it. And it felt risky at the time, but those risks really started to pay off because you realize that selling a gig poster is kind of like finding Cinderella to give her glass slipper. People need to like the band. They want to have been at the show. They want to have an attachment to the city. And then they also have to like what your dumbass did, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to stitch all this stuff together. But with the art print, it's like maybe they just like, you know, a city that I'm celebrating or a topic or my thought. And so for a while, a lot of people started to really lean into the art print. And then people got involved with movie licensing, and there was a middle point in Flatstock where the rock and roll stuff had kind of seen its way, and people were listening to less music because of the internet. Fandom for music was declining. And so people were just trying to make a path on art prints, going over to movies, re-releases of movies, and it got a little murky there for a while on what was it actually about. And I always thought that the name was API, American Poster Institute. Nowhere in there does it say rock and roll. And I always thought it should be about printmaking. And now the rules have adjusted to where it's just about printmaking.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about that adjustment of the rules, and has that changed things at all? Because some people predicted it would be doom and gloom if we'll have to let the guy in that has a baseball card shop.
Well, I mean, for me personally, I fell into gig posters after I was already doing art prints for myself for years.
That's why we're not talking to you.
Yeah, right. But it gave me the opportunity with those rules loosening up to be a part of this scene, to meet this community and learn the tips and tricks and make the friendships that I had. Where for the longest time I was like, all right, that's the Cool Kids Club. That's the official people. How do you get into gig posters when all these talented artists are the ones doing all the gig posters? It's hard to get your foot into the door to new bands, especially as merch companies kind of take over for them and change the dynamics of how they get hired to do gig posters.
I changed what I was saying. I do want to hear what you have to say, because that's an absolutely great point, that bar of entry has been removed. Mm-hmm. You could be sitting at home, be a great illustrator, a printmaker, but you're like, I don't know any fucking bands. I don't know anybody who books shows. Like, how do I get into this? So you're absolutely right. The fact that you could show up now, day one, just selling your own art prints that you illustrated and printed yourself, that's an amazing point.
Thank you.
I think it also just helps bring more people in. So we were always kind of bummed when it was like the Kevin Tongs of the world, who's an artist who does a lot of movie posters, could no longer be a part of Flatstock. So anyone that he brings in is not going to be there. Like Shepard Fairey's done Flatstock before. There's people who bring in an audience, and if we can just have bigger crowds, then the more the merrier. And I think we're happy to have that competition because it hopefully is going to help all of us.
Dan?
I think there was a fear that Mondo would come in with their movie posters and just kind of wipe out the whole ecosystem that had been built, which didn't happen, largely because Mondo kind of...
They felt another demise.
They went through some shit.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it would probably benefit us in the end to open up to just more styles and more variety of products.
I always thought it was about the printmaking and the creative process. To me, that was the brotherhood, even though we had plenty of female cohorts that did it with us. But I always felt like that was the brotherhood, was that, it's these people that are working long hours and weekends, betting on themselves, keeping this old technique alive. But the amount of innovation that Gig Posters has brought into silk screening is phenomenal. The mixing of the colors, transparent inks, the halftones, like all of that stuff. Like it's insane where that body of work is at 100 versus where it was at 1. It's been a hell of a journey, and I've been excited to be a part of it. I always like to do this because DCon always happens at the end of the year. I like to always ask everybody, what's your goals for next year? Because I find that's inspiring to people that are listening. Mike, what do you want to get into for 2025?
For 2025, I really want to elevate the booth setup and get into more shows. I'm probably doing around 25 this year, maybe do 25, 30 next year, and just keep kind of finding ones like this that cross the barrier of craft fair, but get more into branded type stuff, diversify the product line, make some stickers because I hear those sell well, and just really just try to elevate what Stuff Brain means as a brand and keep pushing the art medium forward.
Nice. Nathan, what's on tap for DKNG? Vasectomies?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's interesting hearing someone doing that many events versus where my business partner and I are at, having young kids at home. It kind of changes the whole ballgame of what is important and what you're gonna prioritize. But I think diversifying is definitely on that too of, we've gotten into like digital products and we wanna do that more of how can we sell more and get into, what we consider more passive income, different types of products. I think we're excited also to try designing things that are like tangible goods outside of posters. And so it's this balance of like, how can we keep money coming in the door, but how can we also have fun and not feel stale in our endeavors? So just trying new and different things each year.
This is a good room to be in if you're thinking about trying to make more tangible goods, because there's people here that are figuring out how to make anything, whether they're actually making it themselves or they're sourcing factories that can make it for them. Like, it's a really good walkthrough on like, oh, what's my version of that?
Yeah.
Whatever
like,
that is whatever catches your attention.
3D printing, and like I do a lot of woodworking just as a hobby, and now a lot of woodworkers are using 3D printing to supplement that. And I could totally see in our world getting into that, whether it's prototyping a new product or just experimenting as a way to kind of like test new waters.
Dan?
I actually have a completely different outlook. I'm trying to get more into speaking and teaching about creativity. There's a lot of people out there doing like tutorials on how to use products and stuff, but there's not a lot of people speaking sort of from a 30,000 foot view about like what is creativity, how do you be a creative person. So I'm actually moving more into that realm of almost an academic kind of realm of I don't know, being like the old guy who talks about stuff like that.
Industry needs some old guys that can talk about stuff like that, because the technology is going so fast right now. The bar to entry has never been lower. And so congratulations, you're here with everybody else. Navigating the waters and finding your path, that's not easy.
Well, I think the technology is actually destroying a lot of the creativity. Like we talked about with having parameters and 2 colors to work with, it makes you a more creative person. And now that you can just type a command into Photoshop and have it burp out a picture of something, it makes it look like creativity's easy, but that's not actually creativity. That's not what the AI is doing. It's taking a prompt and like making a thing. And I think that's actually going to be detrimental in the long run.
Yeah, I think the easier creativity gets, the more difficult creative careers will become.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because, right now there's a whole generation of young kids that all have iPads. And design is a part of that. Design is becoming a new language that everybody speaks. So being a talented illustrator, a typographer, and a printmaker, that is something that those kids don't have in their iPad. And technically, I'm just trying to destroy all those kids. So that's the competitive edge that we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like skateboarding. You're the only one that can land the trick.
Yep.
Nobody else can do it for you. You're gonna have to fall a bunch of times to get it right. And creativity is like that. You can't just generate it. You really have to work through it. You have to develop your style. You have to find your voice and figure out what tools you enjoy using and how to execute it. And there's no quick way to do that.
Yeah. And you got to keep in mind, pain is temporary and chicks dig scars. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being a part of Flatstock 100. Thank you for being a part of DCon and doing this panel with me. I appreciate all your friendship and everything that you guys do, both for this community and for me as a friend. So thank you so much for sharing the stage with me. Ladies and gentlemen, let's make some noise for Flatstock 100. Dan Stiles, Nathan Goldman of DKNG Studios, and Mike Clock of Stuff Brain.
Thank you.
Thanks.